name is Serena Caldwell. I'm 36. 4 months ago, I flew 22 hours to be the maid of honor at my best friend's wedding. When I arrived at the church, her fiancé's mother met me at the door and told me my name had been removed from the program. "There's been a change in plans," she said without flinching. I stood there in the dress Maya had personally picked for me, holding a handwritten speech I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting, and watched that woman's face show no remorse, no apology, just a door quietly, deliberately closing. What she didn't know was that I had personally funded nearly half of that wedding. My credit card, my savings, my name on 4 different vendor contracts. 3 days later, Maya called. Not to explain, not to apologize. She called because a $41,000 invoice had landed in her inbox, and every single one of those vendors had my number on file. And what I said to her, she never saw it coming. Before I take you there, please take a moment to like and subscribe if this story is already pulling you in. And drop your country and the time it is where you are in the comments. I genuinely want to know where in the world you're listening from. Now let me take you back to 8 months ago. The evening Maya Laurent called me from a rooftop in Barcelona and changed everything. It was a Thursday night in Melbourne, the kind of autumn evening where the air smells like rain that already left. I was on my couch with a bowl of pasta, half watching a documentary about deep-sea creatures, when my phone lit up with Maya's name. We'd been best friends since we were 11 years old. 25 years. She knew every version of me that had ever existed, and I knew every version of her. "He proposed," she said, before I even finished saying hello. Her voice was shaking in that specific way that means joy so big it doesn't fit inside a normal speaking voice. "Daniel proposed, on the rooftop of the hotel. The whole city was lit up, Serena. It was perfect." I set my pasta down. "Maya." "I know." "Maya." I know. And then we were both crying, which is exactly what 25 years of friendship looks like. Daniel Voss was a good man. I'd met him twice, once at a New Year's party in Sydney, and once at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in Brisbane. He was calm, well-read, the kind of person who actually listened when you spoke, instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. His family was old European money. His mother, Helene, a woman I'd only seen in photos, always impeccably dressed, always looking slightly above whoever was standing next to her. "We're thinking of venue in the Hunter Valley," Maya said. "Late April, not too big, maybe 80 people. "Tell me what you need," I said. "Everything," she said, and I meant it, and so did she. 2 weeks later, Maya called again. This time her voice had a different quality, careful, measured, like she'd rehearsed what she was going to say. "Okay, so I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." I knew that opening. It was the same one she'd used when she told me she was dropping out of law school, when she told me she was moving to Paris for a year, when she needed something she knew was a lot to ask. "The venue in the Hunter Valley requires a credit card to hold the booking," she said. "It's the Millwood Estate. You know it?" I did. Millwood Estate was the kind of venue people saved for years to afford. Rolling vineyards, a restored heritage homestead, accommodation for guests. It was extraordinary, and it was expensive. "Daniel's family is contributing," Maya said quickly. "Helene has already committed to covering the catering and the honeymoon, but the initial booking contracts need a guarantor with strong credit history. Daniel's accounts are all tied up in his business structure, and mine, well, I had that card issue last year. The card issue from last year was a $9,000 debt she was still paying off after her Paris freelance work dried up. I'd lent her $2,000 of it myself." "How many contracts?" I asked. 4. The venue, the florist, the photographer, and the string quartet. Total exposure is about $43,000, but the deposit is only $4,000 now. The rest is due after the event. $43,000 under my name. "Maya, Serena, I would never ask you this if I had another option. You know that. And Helene has already confirmed the funds. It's just paperwork. It's just your name for 6 months." I'd heard that before. 3 years ago, I co-signed a lease for my cousin Jason. It took me 18 months to get that off my record when he broke the lease and disappeared to Cairns. But this was Maya. 25 years. The girl who sat with me in the hospital waiting room for 11 hours when my father had his surgery. The one who flew to Melbourne the same week my engagement fell apart and slept on my couch for 4 days without once saying anything that started with, at least. "Send me the contracts," I said. "I'll read them tonight." I signed every one of them before the week was out. Over the next 4 months, the wedding grew. Maya and Helene were in constant contact, rebuilding the guest list, upgrading the floral arrangements, adding a second photographer. I was included in some of it, not all of it. There was a WhatsApp group called Millwood Bride that I wasn't part of. I found out about it when Maya accidentally sent a screenshot of a seating chart to our personal chat. I could see the group name at the top. I didn't say anything. I told myself she was overwhelmed. Planning a wedding while working full-time is a lot. People drop threads. It doesn't mean anything. I called twice to ask about the Maid of Honor duties, whether there was a rehearsal dinner, what I should expect on the day. The first time, she said she'd send me a full rundown by the end of the week. The week ended. No rundown. The second time, she texted me back 40 minutes after I called. "Crazy busy right now. Helene is being a lot. I'll call you this weekend." She didn't call that weekend, or the next. I wasn't sent a formal invitation. I told myself that was normal. You don't send your best friend of 25 years an invitation. She's already coming. She's the Maid of Honor. She's family without the paperwork. Then, 5 weeks before the wedding, Maya posted a reel on Instagram. The bridal party at a lunch in Sydney. 7 women in dusty rows holding champagne glasses, laughing. Maya in the center, glowing. Caption, "My ride or dies. My forever people." I was not in that photo. I was not at that lunch. I had not been invited. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after that. I thought about calling. I thought about texting. I thought about all the ways I could phrase the question without sounding like I was making her engagement about me. I talked myself out of it. Maybe I'd missed a message. Maybe it was a Sydney thing, and they hadn't wanted to ask me to fly up just for lunch. Maybe I was projecting. I set my alarm. I had a flight to book. I took 8 days of annual leave. I only get 15 a year. 8 of them. For this. My flights from Melbourne to Sydney and then a hire car to the Hunter Valley cost $610. The hotel in Pocolbin, 4 nights at the closest decent place to the estate, was $890. Maya's wedding gift, a custom illustrated portrait of her and Daniel that I'd commissioned from an artist in Edinburgh, she'd mentioned loving once in a passing comment 8 months ago, $580. My dress alterations, $140. Total, before I set foot in the valley, just under $2,200. On the flight from Melbourne to Sydney, I opened my notes app. I'd been working on my Maid of Honor speech for 3 weeks. I had jokes. I had the story of the time Maya and I got lost in Rome at 2 a.m. and ended up eating pizza on the steps of a fountain with a group of Spanish students who didn't speak a word of English, but somehow we laughed until we couldn't breathe. I had the part where I talked about what it means to watch someone you love find the person who sees them the way you've always seen them. I practiced it quietly, lips barely moving, staring out the window at the clouds. When we landed in Sydney for my layover, I texted Maya. "Just landed in Sydney, 2 hours until my connection. So excited, can't wait to finally hug you." I watched the delivered tick appear, waited 15 minutes, then 30, then it was time to board. No reply came until I was already on the second flight, phone in airplane mode. When I landed and connected to Wi-Fi, her message was there. "See you tomorrow. It's going to be a big day." No exclamation for me. No can't wait. No, I'm so glad you're here. 5 words and a vague noun. I read it in the hire car, watching the vineyards roll past the window in the late afternoon gold. I told myself it was pre-wedding nerves. I told myself she was probably with Helene. I told myself to stop reading into text messages. I checked into the Pocolbin Inn at 8 p.m. on a Friday. The woman at reception had a warm face, and she asked if I was in town for the Vos Laurent wedding. I said yes. She said it was all anyone was talking about, that Millwood was spectacular in autumn. "Are you family?" she asked. I said, "Something like that." My room had a view of someone else's vineyard. I hung my dress carefully on the back of the bathroom door, set out my speech notes on the desk, and called my sister Bex back in Adelaide. I told her I was excited. She asked why I sounded like I was convincing myself. I told her she was wrong. I showered, got into bed, lay in the dark, and for the first time let myself think the thought I'd been pushing away for months. Something is wrong. I just don't know what yet. I fell asleep holding my phone, still hoping for a message. Saturday morning, wedding day. I sent Maya a voice note at 7 a.m., just 30 seconds. Happy wedding day, my love. I am so proud of you. I'll be there for whatever you need. Tell me when and where." She didn't respond. I told myself she was in hair and makeup. At 9:30, I drove to the estate to find the bridal suite, assuming I'd be getting ready with the bridal party. The woman at the Millwood Estate reception desk checked a list. "And you are?" "Serena Caldwell, Maid of Honor." She looked at the list again. She scrolled. She turned the clipboard over as if there was something on the back. "I'm not seeing you listed under bridal party access." I blinked. There must be a mistake. I'm the Maid of Honor. Maya Laurent is my best friend. The woman's face was doing something careful and professional. "I'll need to check with the coordinator. Would you mind waiting just a moment?" I waited. I stood in the driveway of Millwood Estate in my dress, with my speech in my bag, and I waited. The coordinator came out. Her name tag said Priya. She looked apologetic before she even opened her mouth. "Ms. Caldwell, I've spoken with the wedding party coordinator, and unfortunately your access to the bridal suite is not on today's approved list. I was told the Maid of Honor arrangements were changed 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks ago. Changed by whom? I was given direction from Mrs. Helene Voss. Helene. Not Maya. Helene. "I'd like to speak to Maya, please." Priya's expression shifted into something practiced and pained. "The bride has requested no interruptions until the ceremony. Those were instructions from this morning." I stood there. The autumn light was coming through the eucalyptus trees in long, soft lines. A kookaburra laughed somewhere above my head, which felt deeply unfair. "I'll wait for the ceremony," I said. "Of course," said Priya. "Guests are being seated in the garden from 1:30. Guests, not the Maid of Honor. Guests. I walked back to my hire car. I sat in it for 22 minutes. I opened my speech notes. I read them once. I folded them in half and put them in the glove box. Then I got out, straightened my dress, and went to find a seat with the guests. The ceremony was beautiful. Millwood in April is the kind of beautiful that doesn't feel real. Wisteria on the old stone archway, string quartet playing something I recognized but couldn't name. 80 people seated in pale gold chairs on a lawn that sloped down toward the valley, and at the front, a bridal party of 7 women in dusty rows who I recognized from the Instagram reel. I was not one of them. I sat in the 5th row. I watched Maya walk down the aisle on her father's arm, and she was luminous, genuinely luminous, the way people only are on days that mean everything. She didn't look at me when she passed. Or if she did, her gaze slid right past me the way eyes do when they're not expecting to find something. I watched Daniel watch her walk toward him, and I thought, okay, at least this is real. At least this part is real. During the vows exchange, the celebrant mentioned each bridesmaid by name. 7 names. A pause between each one. Mine was not among them. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and my speech in the glove box of a hire car 40 meters away, and I breathed through my nose the way my therapist taught me when I'm trying not to feel something in public. The reception was in the estate's great room. Long tables, candlelight, autumn flowers everywhere. I found my name on a seating card near the back. Table 11, next to a couple from Daniel's office in Frankfurt who spoke limited English and were very kind about it. There were 11 speeches. Not one of them was mine. After dinner, I went looking for Maya. I found her near the dance floor, mid-conversation with Helene and 3 women I didn't know. I waited at the edge of it. She saw me. I know she saw me. She looked directly at me for 2 seconds, then turned back to her conversation. I went to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror for a while. Then I texted my sister Bex. Something has gone very wrong, and I don't know what yet. She called immediately. I didn't answer. I went back to the table and ate the rest of my dessert. I drove back to the inn at 10 p.m., 2 hours before the reception ended. I had my speech and my dress and $2,200 out of pocket and a wedding gift waiting at the estate's gift table that I was now certain Maya would never ask me about. I lay in the dark for a long time. Then I opened my notes app and I started making a list of every vendor contract I'd signed. Every one of them. Sunday morning, I woke up to a message from a woman named Patricia, who introduced herself as the estate's accounts manager. She was very polite. She said that the final invoice for the wedding services had been processed and that as the listed guarantor on the contracts, I had been sent a copy of the breakdown for my records. The total outstanding balance after the initial deposit was $38,700. I sat up in bed, read it again. $38,700. Still under my name, still pointed at my accounts. I called the estate directly. Spoke to Patricia personally. She confirmed that the Voss family had indicated they would be managing the balance, but that as guarantor, I was legally responsible if those payments were not made on schedule. I asked when the first payment was due. 30 days, she said, from today. I thanked her. I hung up. I got dressed, drove to a cafe in Cessnock, ordered a long black, and sat with my phone for 1 hour doing nothing except being very quiet inside my own head. Then I opened my contacts, found Maya's number and typed, "I think we need to talk. When you're ready." She didn't reply that day, or the next. I drove home to Melbourne on Monday. I stopped at a rest stop outside Goulburn and called my lawyer friend Dominic, who owed me a favor from the time I proofread his entire master's thesis. He told me to document everything. Every contract, every communication, every message. He told me to get copies of all signed agreements. He told me, in the gentlest possible way, that depending on how the Voss family handled the payments, I might be in a genuinely difficult position. I sat in the rest stop car park eating a service station sandwich and realized that I had just watched my best friend get married from the 5th row, without a speech, without a role, and was now staring down almost $39,000 of legal exposure. And she still hadn't called. She called on Tuesday, 3 days after the wedding. I was at my desk at the architecture firm where I work, in the middle of a site plan review, when her name appeared on my screen. I excused myself, walked to the stairwell, and picked up. Serena. Maya. A pause. The vendors sent final invoices. I know, I said. You've seen them? Patricia from the estate called me Sunday morning. Another pause. Longer. Helene said she was going to handle everything directly with the vendors. She said my name would be removed from the contracts before the wedding. It wasn't. I know. I'm so sorry. I thought... Maya. I said her name the way you say it when you need someone to stop and be in the room with you. Before we talk about the invoices, I need to ask you something. Silence. Why wasn't I in the bridal party? The silence on the other end was a specific kind. Not empty, full. Full of something she was choosing how to arrange. Helene felt that the bridal party photos would look more cohesive if everyone was from the same social circle, she finally said. She thought it might be awkward to have someone who didn't know the other girls. 25 years. Someone who didn't know the other girls. And you agreed, I said. It wasn't a question. I didn't want to fight before the wedding. Helene is... She's a lot, Serena. You know I've been dealing with her through this whole process. Did you agree? I said again, very quietly. Another silence. Yes. One word. Yes. I sat with it. Did you know that she told the estate coordinator I'd been removed as Maid of Honor 2 weeks before the wedding? She told me she was restructuring the bridal access list. I thought it just meant the morning schedule. Did you tell her that I was your Maid of Honor? No answer. Maya, did you tell her that my name should stay on the bridal party list? I tried to find a middle ground. That's a no. I heard her breathing. I sat in the 5th row, I said, at your wedding, in a dress you chose for me, with a speech I wrote for you, at a table next to strangers, and you looked at me across the dance floor and you turned away. She started crying. I know, and I'm so sorry. Helene had been threatening to withdraw the catering contribution if I didn't let her manage certain things, and Daniel was stressed, and I told myself you'd understand because you always understand. And there it was. Because you always understand. Because you always absorb it. Because you are always the one who makes room. I need you to be honest with me about one thing, I said. Did you know my name was still on those vendor contracts when you let Helene take over the bridal arrangements? A very long pause. I assumed Helene had sorted it. That's not an answer. I didn't verify it, she said, very quietly. I didn't verify it. I closed my eyes, took a breath. Okay, I said. Here's what I'm going to tell you, and I need you to hear it clearly. I am not paying this invoice. Not $1 of it. These contracts were signed as a favor to you, guaranteed on the understanding that the Voss family would cover the costs. If they fail to pay and the vendors come to me, I will dispute every single contract on the basis of misrepresentation, and I will involve a solicitor. I have documentation of every communication. Serena, I'm not finished. The money is one thing. I can fight the money. What I can't get back is the seat in the 5th row. I can't get back the speech in the glove box. I can't get back being erased from the day I helped build. And you let that happen. Not Helene. You. I know, she whispered. I know. I'm going to need some time, I said. Take as long as you need. I'm not saying that as a kindness. I'm saying it because right now I genuinely don't know if what we have is what I thought it was. I heard her breath catch. I'll call you when I'm ready, I said. I love you. I also need to not talk to you right now. I hung up, walked back to my desk, finished the site plan review, went home, cooked dinner, and for the first time in 6 months, didn't check my phone waiting for a message from her. What happened next unfolded across 3 weeks, and I'll tell you all of it, because it matters. Dominic, my lawyer friend, sent a formal letter to Helene Voss on my behalf within 72 hours of my return to Melbourne. It outlined the nature of my guarantor agreements, the terms under which I had signed, and the verbal assurances given to me at the time of signing. It also outlined my position clearly. I had been excluded from the event for which I had provided financial guarantorship, the contracts had not been updated or released as promised, and I was not willing to bear any financial liability arising from an event I had been systematically removed from. Helene's solicitor responded within a week. Their position was that I had signed the contracts voluntarily and that the social arrangements of the event were separate from the financial agreements. Dominic said that was their opening position and that we had more room than they were showing. He suggested we also contact the vendors directly. We did. The Millwood estate, it turned out, had extensive experience with guarantor disputes and was more interested in being paid than in fighting about who paid them. Their accounts team confirmed that the Voss family had already been in communication about a structured payment arrangement. The florist was less accommodating. The photographer was somewhere in the middle. The string quartet was 3 musicians and a very tired cello player who just wanted a check. Any check, from anyone. Over 10 days, Dominic negotiated my formal release from 3 of the 4 contracts. The Voss family was confirmed as the primary responsible party in writing. The florist took longer, but by the end of week 3, I was off that one too. Total amount I ended up legally liable for? 0. Not 1 cent. But that's the clean version of the story. The messier version is what it cost to get there. Not in money, in something harder to measure. There was an afternoon, 9 days after the wedding, when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Daniel. He'd found my number through a mutual friend because, as he said, he wanted to tell me something without Maya knowing. He said he hadn't known the full extent of what Helene had done until the morning of the wedding when he overheard Helene speaking with the estate coordinator. He said he'd confronted her immediately, and she'd told him it was already done, that the bridal party was set, that disrupting it now would cause more harm. He said he should have insisted anyway, and that he was sorry he hadn't. I should have walked you into that ceremony myself, he said. I believed him. I had no reason not to. He was calm, direct, not making excuses for Helene beyond explaining her pattern, which was apparently one of control dressed as care. She does this, he said. She identifies who she sees as a variable, and she minimizes their influence. She's done it in my family for 30 years. I should have protected Maya from it before the wedding. I asked him if Maya had known about the bridal access list change. He went quiet. Then he said, she knew. She told herself it was Helene managing logistics. But she knew. I thanked him for calling. He said he hoped, when the dust settled, that we'd all find a way through it. I said I hoped so too and wasn't sure I meant it. My closest friend at the architecture firm is a woman named Jin. She has a gift for sitting with difficult things without trying to fix them. I told her the whole story over 2 long lunches in the week after I got home. At the end of the second one, she said something I've thought about every day since. The worst part isn't that they did it. People do things like this. The worst part is that you saw it coming. Not the specific shape of it, but the feeling. You saw it coming and you loved her enough to talk yourself out of what you knew." She was right. I'd been talking myself out of what I knew for months. The group chat I wasn't in, the rehearsal dinner I wasn't invited to, the Instagram reel with 7 women in dusty rows. Every single time I had a thought that started with "something's wrong," I immediately built a case for why I was misreading it. Because it was easier than the alternative. Because the alternative meant that the person I trusted most in the world had made me invisible when it mattered most. The Voss family made the first payment to Millwood Estate 3 weeks after the wedding. Helene did not contact me directly at any point. Not an email, not a message, not an acknowledgement that my name had ever been on those contracts. Daniel confirmed to me, through a second brief phone call, that Helene viewed my involvement as a practical arrangement that had been handled. Not a favor, not a kindness. A practical arrangement that had been handled. I added that sentence to the Notes app on my phone, next to the list of vendor contracts. I wanted to remember exactly how it was described. Maya texted me 2 weeks after my call with her. It was a long message. I read it 3 times. She talked about the stress of the planning process, she talked about Helene's dominance and Daniel's conflict avoidance, and how she'd felt in the months leading up to the wedding, like she was constantly managing competing demands. She talked about how she hadn't meant for it to happen the way it did. She said she loved me. She said I was her person. She said she was mortified by what I'd experienced on the day. It was a good message. It was genuine, I think. I could hear her voice in every sentence, the particular way she builds an explanation before she gets to the center of what she's trying to say. But I read it 3 times, and the thing I was looking for wasn't quite there. She hadn't said, "I knew you were excluded and I let it happen." She'd said, "I hadn't realized how bad it would feel for you." Those are 2 different things. One is accountability. One is empathy that stops just short of responsibility. I didn't reply for 5 days. When I did, I wrote this. "Maya, I hear you. I know you love me. I know the planning was hard, and Helene is a force of nature. But I need you to hear something clearly. You didn't lose your maid of honor to logistics. You let someone erase me from your wedding day, and you chose not to fight it. I know why. I know the pressures you were under. I'm not telling you you're a bad person. I'm telling you that what you did hurt me in a way that's going to take time to move through. I'm not ready to pretend it didn't happen. I'm not ready to be fine. When you can say the actual thing, that you knew and you let it happen, I'll be here. Until then, I need space. Love, Serena." She didn't respond immediately. When she did, 48 hours later, it was a single line. "I knew. I let it happen. I'm so sorry." 3 sentences. Short, undecorated. I read them on my lunch break sitting on a bench outside the office, and something in my chest shifted. Not all the way, but enough. Enough for a door to stay unlocked, even if it wasn't open. In the months that followed, there was fallout that reached beyond Maya and me. Within the Voss family, Daniel's older sister Ingrid, who I'd never met but who had apparently been watching Helene operate for years, told Helene directly that she'd overstepped, that using financial leverage over a bride's best friend to control a guest list was not event management, it was manipulation. Helene's response was to stop attending family dinners for 6 weeks. Daniel's father, Werner, a quiet man who apparently spoke rarely and meant everything he said, told Helene that the family's reputation for decency mattered more to him than a coordinated bridal party aesthetic. Helene disputed this. Werner didn't argue. He simply stopped discussing it, which in a family like theirs means the conversation is over. Maya told me this in fragments, over voice notes we started exchanging in month 2 of our cautious, careful rebuilding. She said Helene had apologized to her for creating difficulty on the day, but not in a way that named what she'd actually done. She said Daniel was firm with his mother in a way she hadn't seen before the wedding, that somewhere in the chaos of it, he'd found a line he was willing to hold. I thought about the man I'd watched on the phone when he called me, the quiet kind of steadiness he'd had. I thought about Maya choosing him and thought, maybe she saw something in him she needed to learn from. Back in Melbourne, things in my own life were shifting in ways I hadn't expected. I'd been offered a project lead role at the firm that I'd been hesitant about for months. Something about the timing of the wedding, the months of being invisible in a situation I'd poured myself into, made me look at my hesitation differently. Jin pointed it out first. "You've been waiting to be given permission to take up space," she said, "in your personal life and at work. This is what happens when you spend 20 years being the one who holds things together for other people." I took the project lead role. The first design review I ran lasted 3 hours, and I came home and ordered Thai food and sat on the floor eating it out of the containers because I was too tired to use a plate, and I felt genuinely and specifically like myself. My therapist's name is Audra. I started seeing her not because of Maya's wedding, but because of the 48 hours following it, when I sat in a hire car and a rest stop and a Melbourne apartment and realized I didn't actually know where I stopped and other people's needs began. That's the phrase I used in our first session. I don't know where I stop. Audra described it as a long-practiced pattern of what she calls relational self-erasure. The way I had spent my adult life anticipating what others needed and repositioning myself around it. The way I'd trained myself to read a room and figure out where to shrink to make space for someone else to be bigger. The way I'd called that love. The co-signed lease for Jason. The $2,000 to Maya during the Paris debt. The $43,000 of credit risk for a wedding where I sat in the 5th row. "You've been performing reliability so consistently," Audra said in our 4th session, "that the people around you stopped seeing you as someone with needs of your own. You became a function." I sat with that for a long time. I'm still sitting with it. We speak every Tuesday. I've started taking notes during sessions, which Audra says is very on brand for a project architect. I laughed at that. It was the first time I'd laughed in a session. It felt like progress. Jin and I now have dinner every other Thursday, which started as a check-in after the wedding, and has become something I structure my week around. She brings dumplings from the place near her apartment. I bring a bottle of something. We sit at my kitchen table for 3 hours and talk about everything. Work, her complicated relationship with her mother, my complicated relationship with boundaries, the deep sea documentary I still haven't finished. These dinners are, I have realized, the thing I was trying to feel at Maya's wedding. Being known, being seen, being somewhere I wasn't performing or managing or holding space for someone else. Just being where I'm supposed to be. 5 months have passed since the Saturday at Millwood Estate. The vendor situation was resolved. My name is off every contract. No money changed hands on my end. Dominic accepted dinner at a restaurant of his choosing as payment for his assistance, which was a very good deal for me because he chose a Thai place in Fitzroy that cost $180 for 2, and was absolutely worth every cent. My project lead role is going well. We're 3 months into a mixed-use residential development in the inner north, and I presented the revised site concept to council last week. They approved the design direction with one minor condition about setback compliance that we'd already anticipated. Maya and I are talking. Carefully. With the specific deliberateness of 2 people who have broken something between them and are deciding, piece by piece, whether to repair it and how. She said the actual thing in the end. In a voice note 3 months ago that I've listened to more times than I should probably admit. Her voice was steady. She didn't cry, which is how I knew it had cost her something to say it. She said, "I knew Helene had changed the bridal access list. I told myself it was logistics. I knew it wasn't. I could have called you, warned you, insisted. I didn't. And I let you walk into that day blind because I was afraid of Helene's reaction, and I made that fear more important than you. I'm not asking you to forgive that right now. I just needed you to hear me say it plainly." I held my phone for a long time after I finished listening. Then I sent back, "Thank you. That was the actual thing. I heard it. We haven't fully closed the distance. I don't know if we will, not entirely. 25 years of friendship means the material is extraordinary, but it doesn't mean the shape of it goes back to exactly what it was. I think we're figuring out whether what we're building now is something new or something amended. I think that's okay. I think that's honest. Helene has not contacted me. I have not contacted Helene. Daniel sent me a book in the post 6 weeks ago. No note inside, just a card on the front that said, 'Thought of you when I read this.' It was a collection of essays about architecture and impermanence. I read it over a weekend and thought he was a better reader of people than I'd initially understood. I sent him a thank you text. He replied with a single thumbs up, which I found oddly perfect. I'm not telling you this story so you'll decide what kind of person Maya is, or Helene, or me. People are more complicated than the worst thing they do in a high-pressure moment. Maya made choices I still don't fully understand, in a context where she was under more pressure than I knew. Helene is the kind of person who uses control as a love language and doesn't see the damage in it. I am the kind of person who has spent most of my adult life making myself smaller so that other people could feel bigger and called that generosity. None of us are the villain. All of us are responsible for something. But I'm telling you this story because maybe you recognize something in it. Maybe you're the one who signs the contracts. Maybe you're the one who flies across the country for someone who doesn't hold the door. Maybe you're the one who writes the speech and sits in the 5th row, who says, "I'll understand because you always understand," who performs reliability so consistently that the people you love have stopped wondering if you have needs too. I did all of that. I called it friendship. I called it being there. I called it being the kind of person who shows up. And it is those things. But it's also possible to be the person who shows up and to refuse, simultaneously, to be the person who sits in the back. Those things aren't in conflict. You can show up fully and require, in return, that someone holds the door. A boundary doesn't mean you love someone less. It means you love yourself enough to say, "This is what I'm worth," and then act accordingly. $38,700. That's the number that could have cost me everything. It cost me nothing in the end, because I knew the difference between a debt that was mine and one that belonged to someone else. If you're the one who's always absorbing what doesn't belong to you, financially, emotionally, in every room where you make yourself small, maybe this is the moment you put the speech back in your own bag and walk to the front of the room. You were never meant to be in the 5th row. Thank you for staying with me through this one. Genuinely, I'd love to know, if you were in my position, would you have walked away from the wedding the moment you found out, or would you have stayed for the ceremony? Drop "stayed" or "left" in the comments. I read every single one. If this story reached something in you, please hit like and subscribe. I share stories like this every week, about friendship, about money, about what happens when love and leverage get tangled up together. And if you want more, there's another story in the description I think you'll connect with. I'll see you in the next one. There's something I haven't told you yet, and it matters. In the weeks after I sent that message to Maya, after I said I needed space, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went somewhere alone. Not for work, not for anyone else, just for myself. I booked 3 nights at a small place on the Mornington Peninsula, a converted farmhouse with a wood fire and a view of the bay that turned purple at dusk. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I packed 1 bag. I brought Audra's homework from our last session, which was simply, write down 5 things you want that have nothing to do with anyone else's comfort. I sat in front of that fire the first night and I couldn't do it. Not because I didn't have answers, but because I realized I'd spent so long mapping my wants onto other people's lives that when I tried to locate my own, separately, clearly just mine, I didn't know where to start. I sat there for 2 hours. The wood crackled. The bay turned dark. And slowly, like something surfacing from a long way down, the list came. I want to lead a project that has my name on it and not apologize for it. I want to stop answering texts within minutes, as if my worth depends on my responsiveness. I want to travel somewhere that has nothing to do with anyone's wedding, birthday, crisis, or need. I want to spend 3 hours on a Sunday reading a book and not feel guilty for not being useful. I want to be someone who takes up space without performing gratitude for the opportunity to do so. 5 things. Deeply ordinary. And the fact that I'd never let myself hold them clearly without immediately qualifying them against what someone else needed said more about the last 10 years of my life than the wedding ever could. I stayed up until midnight writing. Not the list, just writing. About what it meant to be needed versus what it meant to be chosen. About the difference between being reliable and being invisible. About all the times I'd sat in 5th rows of various shapes and told myself it was fine, I was fine, I always land on my feet, I always figure it out. I wrote until my hand cramped and the fire went low. Then I went to bed, slept 9 hours without waking once, and in the morning made myself coffee and sat on the back porch and watched a pelican negotiate with the surface of the bay for 45 minutes. It was the best morning I'd had in years, not because anything was resolved, because nothing needed to be. I was just there, in that place, for no reason except that I wanted to be. That was enough. That was, I realized, sitting there with my coffee going cold, what I'd been trying to build my way toward my entire life, and had somehow always ended up handing the materials to someone else. The farmhouse owner, an older woman named Jeff's wife, whose name I never actually caught, came out at one point to ask if I needed more coffee. I said yes. She asked if I was there for a special occasion. I said I was there for myself. She smiled and said good. That was the best reason? I thought about that smile for the rest of the stay. I've thought about it since. It was the smile of someone who'd been there, who understood that arriving somewhere purely for yourself, without an occasion, without a function, without a role to play, is its own kind of milestone. Not a birthday, not an achievement, just the moment you decide that your own presence in your own life is reason enough to show up. When I got back to Melbourne, I made 2 calls. The first was to Audra. I told her about the list and the fire and the pelican. She said that was some of the best homework anyone had ever done for her. The second call was to my mother, who lives in Adelaide and who I speak to every second Sunday in a conversation that lasts exactly as long as we both want it to and no longer. I told her what had happened with Maya, the whole of it, in probably more detail than I'd ever given anyone. My mother is not an effusive woman. She listens in straight lines. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You've always been the one holding the rope. Maybe it's time you put it down and see if anyone comes looking for it." I've been thinking about that sentence ever since, not because it's wise in a self-help way, because it's specific, because she knows me, because she's watched me hold ropes my whole life and never said anything until now, which means she chose this moment to say it, and that matters. I didn't have a response. I just said, yeah. And she said, good. And we talked about something else entirely, and it was, in its way, the most intimate conversation we'd had in years. People come toward you differently when you stop managing the distance between you. I've noticed that. Since I stopped shrinking, certain relationships have grown sharper, cleaner, more honest. Jin and I are closer than we've ever been. My team at work has started coming to me with ideas instead of just questions. My upstairs neighbor, who I'd exchanged pleasantries with for 3 years without ever learning his name, stopped me in the stairwell last month and introduced himself. Marcus. He makes bread on Saturdays and sometimes leaves a loaf outside my door. I don't know what changed. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm just standing in the doorway differently. The thing Audra says, and that I'm still learning to believe, is that being seen isn't something other people grant you. It's something you make possible by being visible. You can't sit in the 5th row, invisible, and wonder why no one knows where you are. 6 months out from Millwood Estate, I went back to the Hunter Valley. Not to the estate itself, but to the region. A work trip, a site visit for a residential development a colleague was consulting on out there. I drove past the Millwood Estate entrance on the way in. Just the turnoff with the sandstone gateposts and the eucalyptus-lined driveway you could barely see the end of. I didn't slow down. I kept driving. But I noticed, and I let myself notice, that something had changed in what it meant to me. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even sadness exactly. It was more like looking at a photograph of a place where something happened to you. You remember it. You feel the texture of the memory. But you're not inside it anymore. You're standing outside it, and the frame is a manageable size. That evening, after the site visit, I sat in a wine bar in Cessnock and ordered a glass of something from a local vineyard I'd never heard of, and I opened my notes app and added to the list. Number 6. I want to come back somewhere that hurt me and feel like I own the ground I'm standing on. I think that one's already done. I'm telling you all of this because I think the story doesn't end where people expect stories like this to end. It doesn't end with the phone call or the invoice or the friend saying the actual thing. It ends somewhere quieter. It ends in a wine bar in the Hunter Valley with a glass you chose for yourself, on a trip that exists for a reason entirely unrelated to anyone else's occasion. It ends with a pelican and a wood fire and a list of 5 things that are only yours. It ends with you, sitting at the head of your own life, understanding finally that you were never meant to be a guarantor of someone else's happiness. You were always meant to be the whole story. And now you are. Thank you for being here until the very last word. It means more than you know. There's one more thing I want to say before I go. It's about Daniel. Not about the wedding, not about Helene, about him specifically, and about something he said to me in that second phone call that I haven't been able to put down. We were talking about Helene, about her patterns, about how she'd behaved throughout the planning process. And I asked him, directly, whether he thought Maya had understood what she was agreeing to when she let Helene take over the bridal arrangements. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't hesitation, but consideration. Then he said, "Maya understands things after they happen. She's not someone who reads the room in advance. She reads the aftermath." I've thought about that sentence more than almost anything else from this whole experience, because it's true. It's precisely, specifically true, and Daniel had found the exact language for something I'd known about Maya for 25 years, but never quite articulated to myself. She's not someone who reads the room in advance. She reads the aftermath. Every apology she'd ever given me, and there had been several over the years, smaller ones, came after. She never saw it coming. She always understood once the damage was visible. I don't know if that makes her a bad person. I genuinely don't. I think it makes her someone who operates from the inside of the moment rather than the outside of it. Someone who feels things so immediately and completely that there's no space for the prior calculation that would have prevented the harm. I think a lot of people are like that. I think I've loved a lot of people like that. And I think the question, the real question, is not whether those people are worth loving. Of course they are. The question is what it costs you to be the one who does the prior calculation for both of you. To be the one who sees it coming and adjusts and prepares and protects, and then also absorbs the aftermath when it arrives anyway because your adjustments weren't enough to prevent it. That's the cost, not the $38,700, not the 5th row seat. The years of being the one who sees it coming and pays the price of it anyway. That's what I've been unwinding in Audra's office on Tuesday afternoons. That's what the list in front of the fire was for. That's what the pelican and the wine bar and the project lead role are all part of. I'm not the one who sees it coming anymore and positions myself to absorb it. I'm the one who sees it coming and says, "Not this time, not this." I'll hold the door for you, but I won't stand outside it while you're inside. I've been standing outside long enough, and if that means rebuilding some relationships from a different foundation, one where I'm actually visible, then that's the work. It's slower, it's less comfortable, but it's real. And after a very long time of performing a version of love that left me invisible, real is exactly what I was looking for. To everyone still out there holding ropes, signing contracts, sitting in 5th rows of every shape and size, you deserve to be in the room. Not as a function, not as a guarantor, as yourself. The whole, full, complicated, takes-up space version of yourself. Go be that. The door's already open, you just have to walk through it.